All right, so
Spine slot.
this is my original nut. I've been playing on this nut forever, so I want to transfer my string spacing to this nut. I don't want to transfer every one of them. I just want to transfer the low E and the high E. Okay?
A little piece of
Fret guard. Right here. All right. One important thing to have, unless you have dividers and you want them equally spaced, I like these fret rules. You can find them fairly cheap on the internet. This one again came from Stu Mac, but I got two other ones at the shop on different stations that came from different places. CE Distribution, I bought one from them. That's because I get a discount and they have tools. You can find them on Amazon. So me, on this, I'm simply just transferring my two outside lines, high E and low E. Okay, if you didn't, you got to decide how far off the board you want to be. And I'm always transferring nuts, so it's a preference thing. Some people like a wider string spacing, but to give you an idea, that's 1/8 of an inch, and I think that that's standard. I see a lot that's closer to 3/32. Depending on what string spacing you want, you got to figure that out. The reason this rule is good is it steps off the spacing and it compensates somewhat for the gauge string. Meaning that if you cut all these equally spaced, it's going to feel and look as if the E, A, and D are closer together because the centers are centered up with each other. But since the gauge string gets wider, it's going to feel like the gap in between them is. It'll be closer. So this kind of spreads out the gauge within reason. I mean, it's kind of odd if you've got massive bass strings. I mean, it's still going to be awkward because those are so fat. Like if you get like one of these 8, 10 string guitars, then it starts to get kind of odd on those spaces.
We call that heresy around here, so something.
All right, so what I'm doing is I'm finding you got short lines, long lines, and I'm finding the string spacing. I'm matching up a long line and a long line. Until I find the right one. And this is how Bob messed up. He made a 5-string nut for a 6-string guitar because he wasn't paying attention to where he was on the rule.
What is that rule called?
String spacing rule.
Stu Mac makes a short version of that, don't they?
Who does?
Doesn't Stu Mac have a shorter version of that?
They might. So then I'm going to map that out.
Go to Fresh.com, you can sell, make your own.
And
Fresh.com.
I have a spreadsheet that spaces out.
Yeah, you use a caliper maker.
now that's Frank Ford's side, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's who made that.
Yeah.
He goes, that site's amazing. He would take, it's just the shop tip section. Like he'll take drinking straws and staple one end, and then like tiny little tuner screws, he'll drop them in the drinking straw and then flip the other side over and then staple it and put it in a drawer. So you can see through the clear drinking straw. And then when you need a screw, you just open the end of it, and then when you empty half of it out, you clip it off, flip the drinking straw over, and staple it. And all sorts of cool little shop tricks that come in handy.
Who is that?
Frank Ford, it's called Frets.
Yeah,
Fresh.com.
Yeah, you got Frets.com, Frets.net too. I think he's got both of them. And the information on repair work on there is fabulous.
He's a genius.
Yeah, he is a genius. that's where I saw that Taylor tip with the tip with the air compressor. It was a Frank Ford video, and it was the guy from Taylor that used to work at Taylor and was working at his shop, and they interviewed him, and he was saying that he used an air compressor to put his accelerator in, like they did at Taylor. All right, I've got nut files. You can pass these around. These are okay. These are straight. I like them. They're fine. I use my old worn ones. Pass those around so people can see. Those are StewMac files. Those are flat files. These have a little bit of taper. They kind of taper up. I like them because it lets the string breathe a tad bit. All my gauges are worn off. I just know what I use. You can cut that string straight to the gauge. Me, I'm using a set of 10 to 52s on this, so I use a hybrid set. I like the hybrid sets for me. And
What makes those?
I use Diodarios, but a long time ago I used to use whatever was the cheapest. You know, if I went in a store, it was Ernie Ball, I'd grab those. It was Diodario or Dean Markley, because I would change it before every show. And instead, I seem to not break strings if I did that. All right, so I'm gonna start all these off with my 10 to 11. I think it's supposed to be a 12, but it's worn from the years, so I don't think it cuts as wide, which is fine, because the other side's 16, which is 16 will bind in that slot if I use that, so I think it's worn. I've been using the same file for 20 years, so that's the problem with it. I don't even bother with what the gauge is, because it's not the same gauge anymore. Probably why I wasn't happy with the new one that I got. So I'm putting my thumb up against the side of it to try to guide it, because that nut's slick. I really polished it out. So it's going to want to slide everywhere. You could use a X-Acto saw for this. I'm just notching it.
And is your line still on there that you made with your flat pencil?
Yeah, it's just almost like a little dot.
Yeah, those are old ones.
So I'm cutting a groove for my files to actually go into. All right, so I want to, so what I'll do is the next step up is going to be this is supposed to be a 12 and a 16, which is really measures smaller than that, like I was saying, and they all do. This was originally a 20 and a 26, I believe. A 32 and a 42. And my numbers have worn off, so I always use, on the bigger side, I just paint Sharpie on there. Then a 32 and a 45. And 50 and a 60. And what I used to do, if like the 45, I would start in with my 45 on a 46 string, and when I cut it, I would just move my file back and forth, like this. That's the, and I rock that file back and forth, and that's what I've always done. Just slightly widen that slot a little bit and get a feel for it. Now you could order files and get almost anything that you want. On this, I'll take a 50, so I got a 50, and I'm going to widen it by rocking it back and forth. I also don't want to cut it too low. I have no concept of where I'm at on here, other than I used to have a line, but when I polished it out, I accidentally cut through it. I can put my flat pencil back on there, may as well. So I'm going to put my flat pencil on there, and we know we do not need to go past our flat pencil because we would be below the fret. Let's find out what our fret is. So that's a good idea. I'm gonna say 53. My highest point on this fret is 54, so it's not completely even. Pretty darn close. So 54 thousandths tall. All right, I don't want to cut, that means if I cut that slot down and it was 54 thousandths of an inch off the fingerboard, then it's going to touch the fret. So we want to be safe. Remember with this one, I'm actually in a little bit of a back bow, so we're gonna, and then it does this, but these two planes are level with each other. So we're gonna say this neck with the strings on it was as level as this gonna get. So I'm gonna end up backing off that ride because I like a higher action than I've been playing on, and I think that that's the reason I haven't been liking the way this guitar plays. I want to be on the safe side, but I want to go ahead and rough these in. So I'm going to stack up feeler gauges. I'm going to add 20 thousandths to it because maybe I want to run a dead flat, and I'm heavy-handed, so maybe I want to run this at 20, 19 or so, but at least I can start at 20 and I can bring it down. I don't want to cut it too low because I don't want to make another nut. So what I'm going to do is take my feeler gauges, and we're going to say the highest part of that nut is, the highest part of that nut is 55, the highest part of that fret is 55 thousandths. Then I'm going to find enough feeler gauges to stack to 55, 65, 75. So 75 thousandths, 20 thousandths over that, or close to it, whatever I can get. So let's add some up. We got 20.
Should have 44 then.
So I've got 22, 20. That's 40, 50, 60. 76. It's close enough for me that'll get me there. That's tall. I didn't realize my fret bar was that tall. I've never measured it out. No wonder I go out of tune. I must be pressing the strings all the way to the board all the time. All my friends are like, Jason, turn your guitar. I'm like, that's it. It's probably because there's these honking frets when I press the strings. And I'm bending them sharp. All right, I'm gonna lay that up there. I'm not gonna cut it with the 50s yet because it's such a wide file. I'm gonna notch it a little bit more with my 45 just so my 50 will ride in that slot so it doesn't slide around. Maybe I'll be able to hear this. I'm going to cut at the angle, close to the angle of my headstock.
What if you're on a Fender? How do you do that?
I would get an idea where you would want your how your strings, before you take your strings off, kind of look at your angle of your strings, and then I would go a little bit sharper than whatever angle's coming off. That's what I usually do. I'm still going at a downwards angle, because if I go flat, I typically will buzz in that slot. That's where I feel the metal. Okay, I can feel it there. This is a 52, so I'm going to go ahead and widen it a tad bit. And then at the end of this, I'm going to kind of come not totally flat like this, but at a slight different angle, and I'm really just backing the file. What I'm trying to do is take the end of that nut off. So let's say we're looking at the nut this direction, and we're looking at the bottom of the slot. Let's pretend that the top of the nut around it is gone, and we're looking at the bottom of the slot from the side. So there's the nut, there's the headstock angle, and you cut it at this direction. So that wound string, once you press it down, that knife edge right there, if you just cut it at that angle, is gonna grab these strings and you're gonna hear ping, 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 and it's just not gonna be great. So that's why when I get right towards the end of this, I'm just trying to soften that edge so it will slide across that. And we'll get to do that a little bit with some sandpaper. So let's say we were going to, I'm gonna go and take, I cut that at a 50 and then would rocket it so I could get up to my 52. And then I'll take a little 800 grit. And then I'm gonna put it on I'm usually not doing this when I'm doing each slot. I'm just making sure I can cover enough before it's time to go. So I usually cut all the slots and I'm gonna put my strings on there, okay? I'm gonna cut all the slots like that. Then I'm gonna start fine tuning everything with the setup. When I wanna go back, I'll cut my slot a little bit lower, measure it, check my neck relief, still make sure that I like where my neck relief is versus my action. And let's say I'm at 20 thousandths. I'm like, okay, I think I wanna go down to 17, it's my electric. I went a little bit lower than my acoustic. And then I'm gonna go a little bit more, just a few swipes. Then I'm gonna stop what I'm doing, put the string back down, and tune it to pitch. You're gonna take my time, because it's gonna be less time to take your time than if you mess up and you have to start all over. So then, once I get that string done where I want it, I'll move to the next one, and so on, until I get them all exactly where I want it. Sometimes I leave them maybe 1/1000th of an inch high. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm like, I'll be fine if it ends up at, if I want it at 17, I'll be fine if it ends up at 16 or if it's at 18. That's not a huge difference. Then I'll go back with my sandpaper, and I usually go 2 gauges below what I just used and wrap my sandpaper in there. And it's 800 grit, so I'm just kind of buffing that whole thing out.
In the slot.
In the slot. And I'm actually going flat. 800 is hard to cut anything. It's just I'm really just burnishing and polishing. And then before I'll do that, that's a 52. So I'm going to take a 60, my 60 side, and I'm going to cut in that slot. I don't want to. On the back side of that slot, I got to watch my peg head. I'm going at a much steeper angle because I don't want to cut into the slot. I just want to cut from halfway through my nut off the back. I'm going to open the back up. I want the back of that to breathe. I don't want the especially when I get here in the center, they're going to come off at angles, right? So I don't want that. I want them to flare out. I don't want to cut them at an angle because then I just have a break angle at the front of the nut. So then I got 2 bearing surfaces on the front of the nut that I'm fighting with instead of it coming straight off. If I see guitars where people will go ahead and slot it at an angle right here, well then I've got most likely a knife edge that somebody didn't take care of in the front that's grabbing my windings, and then I've got it on the sidewall too. So I'll open up the back of that and let it breathe. So your slot looks from the top. Looks like this. And you didn't have to use your brain, you just had to use a file. You didn't have to use any kind of skill or anything like that.
Would you mind doing a side view of the angle and where it actually should rest in the nut?
Are you talking about
Like say,
string?
like a sort of a side view of the nut as to how the string would break.
Oh, yeah, let's see if I can draw that.
Because me and I know several other people, it's always a challenge to try to get the string, seated perfectly halfway in the nut. We always wind up having to go, deep into the.
You have to end up doing what?
But we always would wind up having to go deep into the nut versus just sort of.
See if I can do this. Alright. So, stock angle. Let's say this is. It kind of rounds up, straight. That's your string and that's your windings. Does that make sense?
Yep.
You got half, you don't want more than 3/4 of your string engulfed in there. You know, you want to be able to see some of the string off the top of that. This,
Except the trebles.
huh?
Except the trebles.
If you end up with trebles like that, that's great, but I wouldn't stress on it too much because you're trying to cut that, you know, on a high E string, like you only got 5/1000 of an inch depth, so I wouldn't stress that. I've never had too many problems with it.
Okay. A lot of the pinging and buzzing sounds, like traditionally, I've always thought you're supposed to cut flat. So I'm so glad to see that.
Yeah, you want an angle, you know, flat's a problem too. You know, you got a flat nut, and then you got an angle, and it's coming up, and it's just blah, blah, blah all over here.
Yeah.
And it wants to jump up and down and move. And if you're looking at a nut from the front, you know, idealistically, we want a nut slot that's, you know, and there's the slot, and then here's the string. You know, let's talk about what the old timers used to do. They would go down to, and I've seen guitars, you know, from the some of the guys working on guitars here at Birmingham, including Bob and Herb. You know, Herb was doing this stuff in the '70s. He didn't have all this stuff. He didn't have any information, so you can't blame someone for this. It's crude looking. It would take a 3/4 file and just hog down into that nut with this big massive, and then the string would be in there like this. You know, you got a big air space right there. So it wears quick, and all of a sudden, you know, but at least it would sit. You know, that their 3/4 file would fit anything because it's a V, and the string would just keep going in there. That's because you didn't have access to any tools, or you know, didn't even know something existed. You'll see. Honestly, a nut slot like this works. You wouldn't think it would, but it does. You got a flat bottom, it holds it on the sides, and you actually have less bearing surface. You'll see those on Floyd Roses all the time. Not that it has to slide back and forth through. I wouldn't want to cut a nut that way. And then the files that I use are kind of a variation, if you think about it, of the 3/4 file. It has a nice round bottom, but then when it comes up, it slightly tapers up. So it kind of, then I usually cut that off. So it's really this upper part right here that's also letting the string breathe a little bit.
You draw it from above, looking straight down on
Yeah. So if I'm looking above, I'm gonna say, you know, these nut slots, I'm exaggerating here, I'm opening up the back.
that. That's what I want to see.
That's your 3-string guitar.
Yeah.
And we'll make a 5-string like Bob did, you know.
Keith Richards.
And then, so that's what I'm doing, following suit.
Yeah.
So when this string comes off to that tuner, this string comes off, you know. These are gonna be, the G, the D and the G are gonna be your biggest culprits on most headstocks.
Yeah.
So what about, like, PRS is really good, one of their big things is like, they go down, they stay straight once they go over the nut. Would you still do that just as a rule of thumb if you're working?
Yeah, you
with
can,
it?
you may as well, you've got a better chance if you didn't,
Okay.
that it would work. I mean, not a better chance, I mean, the chances if you didn't, they're coming straight off. So that's really good. So if we had time, I would go through this whole nut. I just want to make sure, and so they're going to practice those techniques on these nuts and then go. I also want to show you this glue boost real quick. My plan was for everybody to have some time to answer questions and talk. But I won't shut my mouth long enough to let anybody do anything. I do want to show you this and how I accomplish it. This has made my work a lot easier. I've got a nut on the side here. It's gonna look a little dirty because I can see the mahogany over here, but that's okay. This is like nylon. I can put my my super glue right on it. If it dries, it'll pop right off. I can keep using it. The company that makes this sent this to me. So this is a little mixing palette. If you wanted to add some color to that, you technically can. I'm probably just gonna go straight on this thing.
I cut out pieces of Clorox bottles.
Ah, that's
We won't
good.
stick to that either.
That's a good idea. All right, so now I'm spreading it down. I've got like a little dam there because I've got a little cavity that's about 0.10 of an inch down in there. Because I cut this side short, I didn't cut the other side short.
That's just cosmetic.
Yeah, this is just cosmetic. I could have left it.
Is that a toothpick you're using?
Yeah, it's a toothpick. I spread that out. I'm going to put another coat on there and just build up coats. That's the accelerator. That's dry. Put another drop on there. I'm going to spread this out.
That doesn't make the nut hard to get off in the future? Or does it?
Well, you're going to score it. It's just like a finish. So sometimes finishes make it harder, but you would score it. So let's say you had a vintage looking binding, it's aged. You could put some amber color in there, and then do on top of this, and start to blend it in like it's the real deal. I'm just checking to see how level I am. Might go a little bit more. Just to be on the safe side. Now I know on this Gibson I've got a top coat of clear, so that's good. I'm rushing through this a little more than I normally would, but I think we're getting good. All right. So I had about 3 coats on that. Now I'm going to take my my favorite file to do this with. Come on, file. It is the same file I dressed the Brethrens with. It's tiny, it's skinny, it cuts really fine. And I'm going to need a little bit more. Got one little spot that's not level or above. This is a trick I always wanted to know. And nobody would ever neither knew or nobody would ever say anything about it. I rarely ever see nuts put on guitars that were re-lacquered in. It makes a huge difference in some guitars, especially if you got a brand new guitar that you have to replace a nut on. This one, it doesn't matter. I mean, I've got so many nicks and dings on this thing. All right, so now, we're pretty hard. I would usually wait a little bit longer. Now I'm just gonna start filing, keeping it flat. It may take me a little bit, but I did get kind of a buildup on there.
Is that like, just like a needle file that you're using?
It's finer than a needle file. It's weird.
Really?
I'm gonna let you look at it. Everybody look at it in just a minute. It clogs quick. I keep moving it around. But I like it because it makes me work a little slow. So if I start to burn through or tag the original finish, I'm starting to see it before it does any real damage. We got a little ways to go here. And this is how I would take care of some dings, not necessarily with this file, but maybe with a razor blade, or however I could level something down. All right. Now I'm going to take a little bit of 600, a little bit of 800, a little bit of rubbing compound.
Is that the same rubber compound you used to polish the nut?
Yes. I'm trying to stay on the nut and a little bit around it.
Like onto the finish and the...
Yeah, because I want to blend it in. We're going to see if I can get away with this. We're almost done.
Are we there yet?
And steel wool. I'm going to blend that whole steel wool into all of this. Compound. And then y'all can all come over here. See what y'all.
So that's just creating a clear finish, right?
What?
That's creating a clear finish.
Yeah, it was just a clear finish I ended up putting on the side of that nut. And then it appears to be lacquered in, which it is. It's just not lacquered in with nitro. All right, I'll come take a look at it. Feel it. That was real quick. I probably would have normally spent a little more time with it.